Coming to you from the Ultra Staff Studios in Chicago, welcome to the Staffing Buzz Network with your host, Bob Petke. Hello, my name is Bob Petke, and I want to welcome all of you to the first ever inaugural episode of the Staffing Buzz Network. Now, some of you may be wondering, what is the Staffing Buzz Network and who am I? Well, I'm Bob Petke. I'm the Chief Sales Officer here for Ultra Staff Edge. We're a full-service front office, back office, ATS, CRM staffing solution. And collectively, we've decided that it'd be great if we can add to the staffing community by having this podcast to share some very relevant, meaningful content to the staffing community. As far as myself, after 15 years in the staffing industry, I'm now on board as the Chief Sales Officer here at Ultra Staff Edge, and we are excited to kick things off with our first ever episode of the Staffing Buzz Network. With that said, I want to go ahead and introduce our very first guest, part of making history, Congressman Nathanial Moran. Congressman, good afternoon and welcome.
Hey, Bob Petke, it's great to be with you on the Staffing Buzz Network. I can't believe that I'm actually getting to be the guest on the very first episode of what you're doing. So kudos to you for starting this up. I hope this ends up being something that's beneficial to those in the Staffing Network. We'll talk a little bit more about my background in that area, but I'm just pleased to be with you. So fire away with any questions you have, and happy to talk about what's going on here in Congress.
No, perfect. And I'm glad you're here. And there's some reasons, besides the fact that you're, in Congress and you deal a lot with labor in the community, your local community, and even on a national scope. Before we get started, Congressman, I'm going to go ahead and give the folks listening a little bit of a background or a history of who you are, if that's okay. And if I got anything wrong here, correct me at any point. So, the way that I have this started, you had a successful law practice in Texas, and from 2005 to 2009, a civil servant for the City Council of Tyler, Texas. I do also have you down as from 2016 to 2022 that you were appointed and then elected as the Smith County Judge. And during that time, and I don't have the exact dates, you also were part of this fraternity of staffing where you worked with a couple of other folks in the industry. And, you helped run a staffing company, where you focused on light industrial logistics staffing in Tyler, Texas. How am I doing so far?
So far, so good. Right on target. And really, I think what I want folks to know about my background is I've always felt called to serve in public service. And the question always has been when, where, and how should I serve? I did that on a volunteer basis as part of the city council, as you mentioned. And then again, I recruited to do that as the county judge. In Texas, county judges are a little bit different. They're primarily administrative. I also had a judicial function, but primarily my role was to run the day-to-day functions of the county and to be the county budget officer for the county and to preside over our commissioners court, which is the governing body of our county government. So that's the kind of thing that I enjoy doing. I told people often, really, I was two things. I was a janitor. I cleaned up people's messes, most of the time messes I didn't make, and I was a professional problem solver because every day you woke up to a new problem. You just had to work through it and solve it. But along the way, as a lawyer, doing business, commercial, transaction, and litigation work, I met a guy that was in the staffing business and ended up being his lawyer. And then when he was ready to exit the business, he invited me to buy that local franchise, which was both in Texas and Louisiana. And with a couple of good buddies from high school, we did that and enjoyed doing that for a number of years until I came to Congress.
So, right, let's talk a little bit about that. So, I'm a little bit familiar with your backstory on that side of it. And, as much as you can or as much as you feel comfortable or want to share, talk a little bit about that partnership with those guys a little bit that got you to that point. Because I know there were a few of you involved in that. And if you could share a little bit of that story, because there's other people in the industry that probably have similar stories.
Yeah, and the thing I would say about the two guys that I was partners with in the staffing company world was they were friends that I've known since at least high school. One of them goes back to kindergarten with me, and we all had a different array of skills. And together we had helped each other out over the years. But the real genius, I guess, the real benefit to the mix was we trusted one another, and we loved one another with that brotherly love
Sure.
to be selfless. Because when I talk to clients all the time as a business lawyer, and folks would often come to me to set up a business or new entity because they wanted to go into partnership with somebody or have an entity with them, I would, I'd caution them and say, listen, you're gonna be fine. You'll only have difficulty if you become really successful or if things fail. Those are the two times when you're going to have troubles with your partners, because generally, if you're not trusting of one another and you don't act selflessly towards one another, then the partnership or the business entity is going to, especially a close entity, is going to go awry. When it goes, one of the only two ways it's going to go: either it's successful or it's not. So you better pick your partners up front very carefully, and they better be as close as family, sometimes closer than family, in order for you to succeed. And these two guys were that. They were closer than brothers.
No, and I'm familiar with that, and it's really a very unique story in the sense that you know, from what I can gather, you've known these guys for years, right? And still maintain that relationship. Although out of staffing, your world kind of changed here for you and your family. And I wanted to make sure that I touched on your family a little bit. You've got 4 school-age children, uh, and you've got your wife Kina. That my numbers might not be right. Over 23 years of marriage, is that right?
Luckily, I made it to 24. We're in the
Okay.
midst of 24. I'm going to have to update my bio, but we married in 1999, and we've got kids from 6 all the way up to 18. My oldest 2 are both graduating seniors this year, so we're going to be left with a first and second grader, and still have a while to go before we get those guys up and grown. But loving every minute of it. We love being a part of our little White House community in East Texas where I grew up. My kids go back to the same school that I was at many years ago, 35 years ago. Had moved away and spent a lot of time away, but was glad to come back. And when I did, I recalled fondly why I love that area so much.
And so while you're in DC, she's holding down the fort.
She is. And this, folks need to realize this too as they get into business, because I know we're talking about really being in business and staying in business. No matter what you're doing in life, there's times when you're going to have to sacrifice. And especially when it comes to public service or service generally, service always comes with sacrifice. It's a theme that I've been talking about this last week with Veterans Day. Recognizing that their service comes with sacrifice, not just for them, but for their families too. And for me, the service is something I love. I like coming to DC. I like being involved in the problem solving up here, but the sacrifice is generally borne by those 4 kiddos home that are missing time with me and my wife, who would prefer not to be a single parent at this point in our life, but would like to see me every night at home. And I would like to be at home, but we know right now, our family needs to sacrifice a little bit so that we can serve this country.
No, and I'm sure the people in your space and place in Texas, along with the rest of us, are thankful for that. So, again, I really want to spend a little bit more time talking about the staffing side of things and your experience in staffing, because there's a saying that a lot of the folks and some of my colleagues, past and present, have when it comes to staffing. And it's the saying, if staffing were easy, anyone can do it. More specifically, and I'm glad that you were able to share your story, how you got into staffing, because, I'm a firm believer that we don't necessarily choose staffing as staffing professionals. Somehow, some way, some shape or form, staffing chooses us. And oftentimes it's I can talk to owners and people that are in the staffing world now, and none of them played staffing when they were little kids. None of them studied staffing in college. It could be that they got into staffing because they went and applied for a temp job, and somebody saw something in them and said, "Hey, why don't you come work for us instead?" So to hear your stories just kind of solidifies, when I talk to different people, that staffing somehow chose you based on that relationship you had with that owner who made that possible.
Yeah, and you just used the key word that I was thinking as you were talking, for not just getting into staffing, but actually being successful, and that is relationships. Relationships are extremely key. Once we were in the staffing business, I think the only reason we were even successful is because of the depth of the relationships that we had in the community, and the fact that we were willing to continue to work to maintain those relationships. Relationships don't just happen overnight, and they don't stay close unless you have ongoing dialogue about tough issues. I often said, as a county judge, I spent the first year and a half building relationships with the other 20 plus elected officials in the county, so that then I could have the ability to tackle the tough problems. You cannot tackle tough problems unless you have a pre-existing relationship, or not in a meaningful way. So folks that have a big client out there, and they're thinking, well, as long as I just let this sleeping dog lie, I'll be okay. No, that doesn't work, because at some point you're going to have a tension. You're going to have a hard issue you got to work through. You're going to have a CBA to work through. You're going to have an injury that all of a sudden, kind of puts people at odds. And you're going to have some tough conversations with your client. If you have not been cultivating that relationship on an ongoing basis, and do not have some strong ties, that conversation does not generally go well. But if you already have a pre-existing relationship and a good ongoing close tie, when that tough time comes, you can have that tough relationship. You can work through it. You may still disagree, but you'll be able to work through it. That's the key, I think, to maintaining and building a strong staffing company.
No, absolutely. And besides the fact, of your where your career has led you now, that there is a segment in time where you earned your stripes and became part of this fraternity that we call staffing. And you hit a lot on some of the things that make staffing work. You talked about being able to have relationships, and real genuine relationships is at that. uh, I'm interested to know that from your time in staffing, are there any takeaways that you had that you felt, maybe positioned you for this next step, as you're now representing, the folks in Texas, as you go and serve in Washington? Are there any takeaways that maybe you haven't mentioned yet?
Yeah, there's certainly the specific knowledge of a variety of businesses that has helped in Congress. I'm the only Texas member of Congress that's on the Education and the Workforce Committee. That uniquely situates me to deal with workforce issues, to deal with skill training issues that are integrated into every staffing company every day. And because I was able to service a number of companies in a variety of regions in 2 different states for years through the staffing business, I already understood how some of these laws and regulations and overly burdensome taxation issues were impacting the ability of these companies to grow, to give back to their employees, to provide benefits to their employees. I understood what the impact is. I'll come back to 4 issues in particular we've been dealing with on education and workforce here in a second. But the other thing that I'll tell you, as part of my staffing experience, that has helped me here is I've never been one that wants to be idle, but owning a staffing company is 24/7 work, and it should be. And that prepared me for the work-life balance here in Congress. I remember one of the years that I owned a staffing company, I had, we were going back into a kind of a ramp up stage with one of our clients, and we had opportunity to redo shift times and staff up during those shift times, but that required me to get up every morning at 2:30 to be on site by 3:30. And I remember for about 5 months, I was meeting groups at 3:30, and then again at 4:30 for training, and then again at 5:30 for another shift, and then again at 6:30 for some more training. And then I'd rush home, take my kids to school, and then go to work my normal day job for the rest of the
Sure.
day. And after doing that for 4 or 5 months, I thought I was going to die because I was getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night. But what you figure out is you do whatever it takes to get the job done, to be mission cognizant of everything that's important, and to use every moment of your day as it comes to you. But on educational workforce, we deal with stuff from the FTC, Lena Khan, and the Department of Labor, Julie Sue, right now. That as it immediately comes to the table, you know how it's going to affect businesses. Things like the joint employer rule that's trying to go through right now, or the push to dissolve the independent contractor relationship, or frankly, the move by the Department of Labor to dissolve franchise agreements or to dissolve non-compete agreements. All four of those things are actively trying to get pushed through right now through the administrative state. On the executive branch side, the Republicans in Congress are opposing that, both with the Department of Labor and with the FTC, pushing back, saying, no. We know you want to rule make your way to laws, but that's going to crush businesses. And so we're trying to oppose that. It's an ongoing opposition. But those four issues in particular, anybody that's been in staffing for 2 minutes knows that any one of those issues would crush the staffing business if it became permanent.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Locally here in the state of Illinois and New Jersey is probably about maybe 8 to 12 months ahead of us. Just some local legislation that they've recently are working on and trying to push through that somewhat handcuffs, the working world when it comes to temporary staffing. And knowing that it's local, I don't want to talk too much about it, but you kind of highlighted some of those things where, there's an advantage to using temp staffing. Sometimes it's a try before you buy opportunity, and giving people a chance to, go into a temp to hire role and basically, demonstrate, maybe with very little to no experience, that they've got the skills, the aptitude and desire to go and do the job. But we're running into some issues here locally that they're working on, and I'm not sure if you have been made aware of some of those things, but it continues to be a challenge as far as how people are paid, where they want people that have been vetted and that are within an organization for a full time. They're looking at the earnings of those folks, and they're looking at the earnings of somebody entry level, maybe in a temp position, and trying to put them on a level playing field without giving them that opportunity to prove themselves.
Yeah, I'm not specifically aware of what's going on in Illinois, or the Chicago area. I've been in touch with some of my colleagues who used to work in the state legislature in California. We've got some of those on judiciary and also on education workforce that just say, look, the stuff that was going on by Julie Sue out in California that she's trying to bring to the Department of Labor here will be crushing to businesses. And what it really is an attempt to do is take away the right to work and to grow in the way that Americans traditionally are used to, where their hard labor can benefit them and their families. And if they're willing to work harder, they can make more money. They can take risks, make investments, buy businesses, in particular through franchises, or work as an independent contractor when maybe the employer-employee relationship doesn't work out quite as good for them to be able to have the freedom that they need to do that. But what Julie Sue and the Department of Labor are trying to do is force everybody into an employer-employee relationship, force those franchises to go away so that you only have large national companies. And in essence, what they're really trying to do, Bob, is force the circumstances to a point where unionization becomes a lot easier, which then flips the coin on leverage as far as what's driving the economy.
Sure.
And I think some of this, I know you're not asking me a labor question, but let me just weigh in on this a little bit. We've been seeing a lot of labor contracts being renegotiated recently, and most people don't realize that. Let's just take the auto unions, for instance. I mean, the increase in the wages and the additional costs that's going to be related to that is going to get passed down to one person and one person only, and that's the person that buys the vehicle at the end of the day. The cost of the vehicle is going to go way up because these companies are still going to make profit. They're going to pass those additional costs on to the consumer, which drives inflation, which drives the cost of those vehicles, and which actually reduces the ability of people that are struggling day to day to access those goods and services that are otherwise being produced by the folks on the line. So I want people to make a good, fair wage, but the free market should determine that. And the free market is determining that in a lot of areas where then folks benefit. I know in my particular business, the more I made, the more I paid my employees, and the more I was able to provide them benefits. That's the way it should work. But when it's forced upon you, then the profitability goes down. Your ability to actually help your employees or provide service to your customers goes down.
No doubt about it. And again, you hit it on the head. It's the consumer that's still going to consume, and it's the company that's going to still make their profit. It's that space in the middle where we're seeing some of the pains right now. With that said, and being in Texas, and I don't want to get into some of the immigration issues, but I want to address an issue that we see a lot in staffing, and it's undocumented workers. There are just so many of them right now. And, what I'm wondering, Congressman, is that, from a federal point of view, what are you seeing as far as, yourself and some of your colleagues, some of the members of Congress? Are there some things that you've seen that are coming up as far as, solutions or ways to address the undocumented workforce?
Yeah, and a lot of this is probably going to come further down the line once we get the border secured, because the appetite here to actually engage in large, widespread, comprehensive immigration reform or dealing with worker status is really secondary to we got to fix the border. And I think folks in the Northeast and in the North and the Midwest, Chicago, New York, everybody's starting to feel the pain now. I know I've heard even recently the mayor of Chicago getting on TV saying we need help. We're getting overrun. Well, if the city of Chicago is feeling bad about 75,000 immigrants, you ought to talk to Brian Babin, who has a colony that's formed in his rural East Texas county. That's 75,000 undocumented migrants that have come over, that have established a huge colony in rural East Texas. Sure. And it's more than the population of the remainder of the county. Well, so I don't feel really that bad for folks in Chicago that are complaining about 75,000 when we have millions in Texas that are straining our systems left and right. Now, let's just talk generally about this.
Sure.
There's some good legislation going on. I know Tony Gonzalez has a good bill called the Hire Act, which I'm on board with, which is a more narrow solution to H-2A and H-2B visas to try to provide for a more extended stay. That's for unskilled and ag workers. There needs to be more that's done there. The process is too difficult. We're not having enough babies in the United States to keep up with the workforce. Let's just admit it. We're not. Now I'm doing my part. Bob,
sure
I've got four, so I'm doing my part to make sure that we have an adequate workforce. But we need skilled and known and laborers here that from a variety of countries, and we can do that appropriately if we follow the rule of law. We can't just say though anybody can come on in whenever they want to. None of us do that in our own homes. None of us would allow that to happen because then it would dissolve the very thing that we're trying to preserve. And so we've got to secure that border. We got to know who's coming across for a variety of reasons. It's not just sovereignty, but it's national security issues as well. But there is an appetite to create the ability for those folks here that don't have the current right to work, to allow them to work. Some of those folks that are here in a way that would be supportive of our economic needs and would be matching their skill sets to what the United States needs. That's always been the reason behind legal immigration. So we need to do it in a legal way, but we need to honor the rule of law as we do that. Because a lot of folks that are trying to do it the right way, going through the process, they feel like they're the back of the line. They're the ones that ultimately get deported. So we don't need to do that. We need to make sure that those that are trying to do it legally are at the front of the line, and we process those folks that we need.
No, and I appreciate your input on that because we are seeing, really for the first time here, and it's really kind of reared itself, front and center. Uh, no matter what side of the aisle do you sit, especially when you're talking about Chicago and New York and some of the, the political heads there, the mayors of those appropriate cities, they're raising their hands saying, hey, listen, we've got ourselves an issue here. So, no matter what side of the aisle that you're on, uh, I'm interested to see, and hopefully, your colleagues and a bunch of other folks that are in DC can steer us in the right direction and get us where we need to be, when it comes to, those issues at hand.
Yeah, and here's the concluding thought on that issue is I tell every one of my chambers, every one of my business folks that talk to me about the need for additional workforce and immigration reform, and I say, if it's really that important to you, then help us get border security passed, because politically speaking and practically speaking, we are not going to take up any comprehensive immigration matters or comprehensive right to work matters at all until we get border security done. Border security is of the utmost importance. And so if people want to get to Part B, they got to help us get Part A done. And right now, we're not seeing enough help in that regard.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that. And what I'll do is I'll switch gears here a little bit, and maybe you can talk a little bit about some things closer to home. Uh, but a former colleague and Fox News contributor, Joni Biley, said last week, that there are signs that there's going to be strength in the economy and jobs when it comes to transportation, logistics. We're seeing a bump in manufacturing and construction jobs. What are you seeing? Let's start out with the folks of East Texas and in your area. What are we seeing as far as how that all consolidates, and more specifically, what are some of your colleagues in Congress seeing in their respective labor markets?
Well, I'm glad Joni has that positive outlook. I hope that's the case. I'm seeing a little bit different take in East Texas, and I'm hearing this differently a little bit from my colleagues, because what we're seeing is a slowing in the housing market, of course.
Okay.
And that's driven by high interest rates with banks. When I talk to bankers, lending for both commercial and for consumer lending is way down. It's a lot harder to find loans to make, because people don't want to pay the high interest rates as a result. There's a bigger market now for rental homes, which they're not out there. And even the rental homes, or the prices for those rental homes are through the roof. So there's an affordable housing issue that we're seeing in East Texas. And that slow in residential housing is actually trickling down to a lot of the manufacturing and industrial base as well, because a lot of it's tied into that. Okay. And so there's some of that manufacturing is slowing down as well. And I think folks are a little bit uneasy about presidential election year next year. So there's caution about not just the world affairs that are going on and how that's going to impact the dollar, the value of the dollar, and the stock market, but it's also going to, they're worried about a little recession next year. So everybody's sitting back just a little bit on production, on investment, on new projects. That's what I'm hearing from folks back home.
Sure.
Now that provides opportunity for folks that are willing to get in that space. And certainly I do agree with Joni that when it comes to transportation and logistics, I think there's a lot of opportunity there presently, because of the lack of skilled drivers and the lack of transportation opportunities and frankly, the cost of transportation of products is high across America. So, if there's new investment in that area or new opportunities in that area, I'd say now's a good time to get into that necessarily. And I do agree with Joni on that.
Great. Thanks on that. I'm going to switch it up again here a little bit. After the best way I'll put it, Congressman, is after a few hiccups, your friend and colleague, Mike Johnson, was named Speaker of the House. And in a recent post that you shared, you said, Mike is the speaker that we need to get our country back on track and deliver results for the American people. I'd love if you could share maybe and expound a little bit more on why you feel that Mike Johnson's the guy.
Yeah, and with this question, I'll have to kind of conclude. I've got my next set of meetings coming up, but here's what I'll tell you, Bob. And it's been a great pleasure to be with you, by the way. Again,
Likewise.
I can't believe I got to be your first episode. But the thing about Mike Johnson is he's authentic and he's value based. You may disagree with him, and we've had disagreements already in the first 3 weeks of his tenure, but he's a man you can trust as far as his word goes. He's always been a man true to his principles. I think he's gotten a bad rap already in the press, but we kind of find it hilarious here in Congress that the national media is always looking for they're always looking for something either negative or crazy to report about somebody, because that's what stirs emotion, that's what stirs anger, that's what drives ratings for them. And so I understand that they have to do that to try to drive their viewership. But the truth is, when you talk to Mike, he's a down-to-earth guy. As I said, he's authentic. He's honest. He is driven by his conservative principles, and he's staying true to those principles. His position now, though, is, and you have to imagine this, his position now is not just to be one of 435, but it is to lead those 435, and ostensibly, at the very least, lead the 221 Republicans in what they're supposed to do. And it's like herding cats, because we got 221 different opinions, all strong personalities, all trying to represent their differently shaded district, and shade by different shades of red is what I say. And his, no matter who you put in that spot, you're still going to have the same differences of policy opinion. You're still going to have the same personalities that were causing trouble before. And so he's in the same muck in the mire that McCarthy had to be in to try to get stuff done. It's not easy. It's not perfect. Legislation's not perfect. So I'd say give Mike Johnson a chance, because you're going to find he is a very good man. He's the kind of man you'd want to live next door to, and he's the kind of man you'd want to lead this country.
Congressman Moran, thank you so much for your time today. When you see the speaker, let him know he is welcome anytime on the Staffing Buzz Network, and share that with your colleagues. And again, thank you for your expertise and your share today. It was really great to have you as our first inaugural guest.
My pleasure, Bob Petke. Have a wonderful autumn season, and we will hopefully talk to you soon, okay?
Sounds great, my friend. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right, everybody. That was Congressman Nathanial Moran. He's from the 1st District in Texas. So, some good input there on the labor market, some of the things that we're seeing as far as legislation that's currently happening in D.C., and really good to get his take on, being a staffing guy, being part of that staffing fraternity. Just really good to have him on as our guest. So, a couple different things here as we start to conclude here today. I just want to thank you all for joining us and listening. And by all means, this is our first one, and we're just going to expound and build upon what we have here. So make sure, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe and tell your staffing pals to join us on whatever their favorite podcast platform might be. And also, if you want to learn about automated business designs, and more specifically, our Ultra Staff Edge front office, back office, ATS, CRM, full-fledged solution, by all means, be sure to look at our screen here that I'm going to pull up next, and you can contact me by phone or by email, or go ahead and check out our website. But thank you, everyone, for joining, and until next time, I'm Bob Petke here on the Staffing Buzz Network.